Good. Rock and roll.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing this for starters.
Sure, anytime.
Yeah, I know it's funny. We had you booked to come about a month ago out to Vancouver, and things had to be put off. But I hear you're coming next year, so
I would love to come.
yeah,
Vancouver's one of my favorite places.
yeah. No, amazing. And actually, funny thing, last we saw each other was the Holistic Holiday at Sea back end of February, and at the time we kind of heard coronavirus making its way overseas and started to hear about cases around the world.
We barely got off on time.
I know. And then, within 3 weeks of me getting back to Vancouver, everything shut down. My clinics closed, stay-at-home orders. Like, given your expertise in this realm, did you see that coming back when we were in Florida?
Well, we had no idea at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, we just didn't really know. I mean, there's been a lot of, this is not the first deadly coronavirus to come out of China. In the last few decades. But the other ones, you were infectious only after you became symptomatic. And so that's how we were able to stop SARS and MERS. And so, hearing there's a new deadly coronavirus, that's serious, but we should be able to stop it before a pandemic rages. Little did we know we could get a killer coronavirus with the same, infectivity during the incubation period that the flu has. And there we go. There's our pandemic.
Yeah. And I do want to spend most of the time talking about nutrition, but for everyone watching, there is a new book out called How to Survive a Pandemic. You got it right there? There it is.
Ta-da!
Yeah, given that you had to cancel the speaking tour, you had all this extra time to write a
That's
book,
right.
as we all do when we have
That's
free.
right.
So yeah, it talks about the history of pandemics, how this current one or why it's happening, as well as what we can do to prevent and safeguard ourselves against future pandemics. So really good book, out in paperback now. Everyone go check it out. Now,
Cool.
getting into nutrition topics, I polled my audience. I got some questions from them, and so we're gonna go through, and I've got some more controversial ones too. So hopefully get your take on that.
Oh, that's even better.
Yeah. So for starters, a lot of my patients and a lot of the people online have told me that their doctors actually tell them that while they might experience some short-term benefit with a plant-based diet, that there are long-term health concerns and drawbacks, things like crashing as far as energy, anemia, osteoporosis, like these sorts of concerns. What would you say to that?
I would tell the doctors to go to their local university library and crack open a book. Look at the peer-reviewed scientific literature and say, or if you want to default to expertise, you can go to the, Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, the largest, oldest association of nutrition professionals in the world, or the Canadian dietitians. They both have come out with position papers saying that strictly plant-based diets are appropriate for all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy and infancy and breastfeeding through old age, and most importantly, has benefits in terms of chronic disease prevention, which are the leading killers. And so, I mean, the doctor just doesn't know what they're talking about, and they should learn themselves.
And talking about all stages of life, what about children? Like, is there any concern there? Are there any special considerations we need to take with children?
Well, we want our children to be particularly healthy, so it's even more important that they eat healthy. I mean, look, they got little tummies, and so given the caloric density, the caloric lack of caloric density, right? How dilute calorically foods are. Kids can't live off a salad, right? I mean, they really have to have calorically dense foods to support their growth. And so we're talking about nuts and seeds and nut butters and avocado and smoothies and all that kind of dried fruit, blah blah blah. Lots of ways really to stuff lots of calories in a little tummy. Normally, I mean that's a big benefit. The fact that foods, mountains of healthy food, have so few calories, I mean it's like impossible to overeat,
Yeah.
and you just lose weight naturally. Okay, yeah, that's a benefit for overweight adults, but as a young child. We want to pack the calories in.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I had some more concerns about or from women who are planning on becoming pregnant soon or are pregnant. Now, I know you have some videos on like preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, and how there's so many benefits, but do you have any good resources or books for people who are either pregnant or planning on becoming pregnant that you can
Yeah,
recommend?
probably my favorite is Reed Mengels has a book on plant-based pregnancies. It's probably the best. She's fantastic.
Okay, okay, excellent. I'll definitely link that one in the video description.
Great.
Now into some of the more controversial stuff. So I
Dun
don't know
dun dun dun.
I don't know if you've seen, I'm sure you've seen it and read it, the recent JACC review, Journal of American College of Cardiology, on saturated fat.
Oh, I have not.
Oh yeah, yeah, you
Do
might want to check that
tell.
one. A new review came out,
Uh-huh.
basically saying that the guidelines around limiting saturated fat to 10% of calories are unfounded. That your small dense LDL particles are the harmful ones, and large LDLs
Right.
totally fine.
Uh-huh.
What would you say, or where does this sort of controversy around saturated fat come from?
It comes from the funding source. Who funded it?
Oh, it's got the most extensive, most hilarious list of conflicts of interest I've ever seen in any study period.
No, no surprise.
Yeah.
But I mean, so I did a whole series
Mhm.
of videos on the saturated fat meta-analyses. Presumably, this is very similar down the same
Yeah.
path, and I just go through. And so it's not enough to say, well, look, of course it's funded by dairy industry or whatever. That's not enough. You have to say, okay, who cares? What did that funding bias? How did that manifest in how the study was designed, or what studies they picked? Or how they interpreted the data. And so I go through exactly how they're able to arrive at this ridiculous conclusion. And so I encourage just write in, type in saturated fat and nutritionfacts.org and they'll all pop up. And this whole LDL, the sense that, the small dense LDL is bad, but somehow the light, fluffy, large LDL is not bad. And it's just simply not true. It's true that the small dense is worse,
Yeah.
but both are bad. One just increases risk like 3 times. One increases risk 2 times, and they both go up when you use saturated fat. I mean, it's just this is what the meat, dairy, egg, junk industries want people to believe. But the evidence is clear. In fact, there was a presidential advisory from the American Heart Association, given all the ridiculous controversy, saying basically, here's the state of the science, very clearly saturated fat from all sources, including plant sources like coconut oil, increase your risk of LDL cholesterol, primary risk factor for #1 killer of men and women. Let's not mess around with it. Really not controversial at all. It's a manufactured controversy. And how exactly were they able to do it? Check out my videos.
Yeah, no, and I believe the saturated fat video is called Buttering Up the Public. I think it says saturated
Yeah,
fat.
that's one of them. Yeah.
That's one of them. And you actually mentioned eggs there. What about eggs? Because, there's this idea that dietary cholesterol doesn't impact our LDL cholesterol very much and doesn't impact heart disease. What would you say to that?
Well, it's not true. So you can do a meta-analysis of randomized control, in fact, blinded studies, interventional trials, where you give people dietary cholesterol either as egg yolks or just crystalline cholesterol, and boom, serum cholesterol goes up. In fact, there's actually that's an equation, the Hegstead equation, where you can really calculate. You can look at their baseline cholesterol, and you can predict exactly how cholesterol is going to go up. And part of it depends on how much cholesterol they're already eating, and there is kind of a plateau effect. You kind of must be kind of saturating your receptors of how you absorb that cholesterol, and so that's how the industry designs a study. They have people eating so much meat, eggs, dairy already, then they add a couple eggs on top of that, and boof, the serum cholesterol doesn't go up as much. That's because they're way out on the plateau curve. You take some vegetarians, some that aren't eating eggs, and you give them half an egg, you can see their cholesterol spike up. But I mean, if you have a bad enough diet, adding more, you're already kind of as bad as you can be in terms of absorbing dietary cholesterol. And there's oxidized cholesterol. It's a long story of all the other problems, particularly with dried egg products and some bakery goods. So yeah, it's not a good idea. And in fact, we'll see what the new dietary guidelines come out. But the 2015 to 2020 guidelines very clear, saying that you should reduce your intake of dietary cholesterol as low as possible. And guess what? You can have a zero intake of diet cholesterol by sticking to plants.
Yeah. No, I agree. And do we have a date for the guidelines to come out, or is it?
Oh, this is interesting. Well, normally they come out in January.
Yeah, that's
But here in the States, the Trump administration is trying to get it out before, while they still have their grubby little hands on it.
yeah, okay.
And this locks it in for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And so they're hoping to put out. You remember, Mike Pence got up and said the Democrats Kamala is trying to take away your meat. They're talking about the dietary guidelines. And meat reduction, and so they're hoping to come out with theirs before, while they still have power, and so it's possible we could really have a regression in terms of evidence-based guidance here in the States.
Yeah, that would be bad. So you actually think it's possible that they'll slide backwards as
Oh,
opposed to forward?
well, yeah, I mean, because of the politics. I mean, the science isn't sliding backwards. In fact, the science is just gaining more and more every year, but just the politics. Now, if they can hold off the process, and we can, I mean, the Dietary Guidelines Scientific Committee, I mean, their report made it very clear, but the translation between the science and what they're actually telling the public, a lot of politics in the middle.
Yeah. Okay, so we look at these like low carb, high animal food sorts of diets that they go through like trends. There's South Beach, Atkins, paleo, keto. Now there's carnivore, okay, where it's literally just meat. They don't eat plants. They think plants are toxic, that polyunsaturated fats cause heart disease, or even I recently heard cancer was another one. And so what would you say about the carnivore diet? Is there any data on it, period?
You don't need that. That's like saying there isn't any data on a Krispy Kreme diet. So I'm going to eat a donut-based diet, and you can't show me a single study saying that's bad. Well, because no one's stupid enough to look at it. I mean, why would you even? I mean, so it's the antithesis of the scientific consensus going back decades of the core elements of healthy eating and living. I would refer people to the True Health Initiative, truehealthinitiative.org. This is kind of like the IPCC of nutrition. You want to know if climate change is real? Let's ask the climate scientists. Let's ask the expert and get a consensus statement from them. You want to know what's real in the science of nutrition? Let's ask the nutrition scientists, the ones that's been studying this their entire lives. And so Dr. David Katz of the Yale Prevention Research Center got together hundreds of the top nutrition researchers in the world to agree on a consensus statement as to what is the healthiest diet for human beings. Spoiler alert, centered around whole plant foods.
Yeah, and Dr. Katz is really good at that. He talks about I mean, there is some debate to be had about, are small amounts of certain animal products or whatever even harmful and all that. But what everybody can agree on across the board is that the vast majority of our calories should come from plants.
There we go. Boom.
It's so easy like that.
Doesn't matter what you eat on your birthdays, holidays, special occasions, on a day-to-day basis, though. Let's try to eat healthy.
Mm-hmm. And within the plant-based realm, like I just kind of alluded to, there is a little bit of back and forth about certain things, nuts being one. I know you're a huge proponent, so am I, of nut consumption being very healthy.
But see, it's not back and forth. It's back and forth on Twitter or back and forth on the internet. It's not back and forth in the literature, and that's all we should really care about.
And on that note, what about like extra virgin olive oil? Because I know oils as a whole, low nutrient density, high caloric density. Maybe if you're just guzzling it back, you get this huge postprandial lipemia and all of that. But what about like extra virgin olive oil on your salad? Is it harmful? Is it helpful? What do you say about that?
So 120 calories per tablespoon. It is the most calorie concentrated food on the planet, any oil, right? I mean, there's no food like lard. There's actually fewer calories in lard because it has a little water in it. So I mean, there is an obesity pandemic on this planet. The average person in North America is overweight, has too much excess body fat. So the last thing we need is the most calorie concentrated food on the planet. Okay, now you say, wait a second, what if I'm skinny and I don't care about calories? Okay, well, still, it's like, what kind of nutrition bang do you want for your buck? So what are you going to get? And, so I talk about my how not to diet speech. I talk about, well, what could you do for 100 calories? Right? I mean, you drizzle, instead of drizzling on some oil, that's like 2 cups of blackberries. That's like, I mean, you can imagine, there's all this food, mountains of nutrition you could get. For the same kind of caloric budget. And so, in the very least, you're just kind of wasting some of your, caloric bank on foods that really don't have the impact. Having said that, if you're going to add some oil, extra virgin olive oil would be the best.
Yeah, and so it's almost like an opportunity cost, is what you're saying.
Opportunity cost, right? Everything we put in our mouth is lost opportunity to put something healthier in our mouth. Absolutely. It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and another one that this is very recent, and actually on Saturday, I know Dr. Ornish, Dr. Kim Williams, Dr. Danielle Belardo, they're going to have this sort of conversation around heart disease and if it's truly reversible. And so kind of where the argument stems is that when we look at like Dr. Ornish's research, there's a 3% regression, and that's apparently not clinically relevant, or in the scientific literature for actual regression, you need was it a 10% change in percent stenosis? Like, what would you say about these sorts of, I mean, ultimately, I think the event reduction, the reduction in heart disease risk that we get with a plant-based diet is more than enough. But as far as the nitty-gritty of whether we can truly claim reversal, what would you say to that?
Of course we can claim reversal. So what they're doing is they're trying to use some statin definition that was used, for example, in the asteroid trial. But that's just talking about stenosis. I mean, look at Ornish's PET scan data, like a 300% increase in blood flow to the heart muscle itself. That's what we care about compared to the control group, right? I mean, we have to think about the collateral arteries, the improvement in function. We are reversing the progression of heart disease, not just symptom-wise, but literally in terms of how much oxygen is getting to the heart muscle. That's what we care about. And then this then translates into reduction of events. What else do we have to need? Why people are bringing up this ridiculous kind of semantic, silly arguments makes no sense to me. And I think Dr. Ornish is going to school some folks.
Okay,
Saturday.
You should join him. I'd love to see it.
I was actually invited.
You were
invited to be part of it. But it's just like, I'm going to comment on the validity of Ornish's work while Ornish is on the phone. Like, what's that even? It's like, let me explain relativity to Einstein. What are you talking about? Right? He can handle himself.
No, I'm so interested to hear what Dr. Ornish has to say about it.
Yeah.
Now,
so basically, they're nitpicking his first study, lifestyle heart trial, right? July 21st, 1990. That was 30 years ago. He has since had this, it's not just quantitative angiography, but there's, nuclear imaging. There's all sorts of, there's plaque morphology. There's all sorts of things you can measure. But they just had this very narrow, well, if you look at this table, as if over the last 30 years, one table has been published on, I mean, it's ridiculous. You just gotta,
No, I'm
PubMed search, people.
Yeah, you've just made me that much more excited to actually see what he has to say on Saturday.
Right.
And one really common kind of question I get from a lot of my followers are, what would your advice be to someone who wants to start looking at the data on nutrition, but maybe they aren't super well versed? They're looking at what can be some really good studies to start with that are maybe easier to read, but show the benefits of a plant-based diet overall.
Easier to read. Well, these days, we used to have to crack open Webster's or something every time. Now it's so easy to almost instantly understand the meaning of terms that were not clear. And so, people, with, undergraduate education should be able to pull up any PDF off PubMed. And yes, there's going to be terms they don't understand. There's going to be anatomical terms, physiological terms, but you can right click on it, do a little go and be like, oh, I see when they say that. When they say, nephrotoxic, they mean toxic to the kidneys. I just didn't know that term, but fine. In 2 seconds, you could learn that. And, okay. And so, I mean, there's lots about, research methodology and stuff that takes a while to learn. But, I mean, if you just want to know, wait a second, what did this study show? You should be able to, do that.
And I know you've been kind of hinting at it for a long time. Do you plan to do a video on like how you or a webinar, sorry, on how you kind of dissect the
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, so actually, oh my God, it's ridiculous. Let me see if so I've been dumping them into this folder, all my studies, um, that that have to do with how to, read a research paper. I am going to do a control I on and see uh, how many papers are in here. Yeah, 3,281 papers. And so it's funny, like the longer, like the more I get in there, it's like the more intimidating doing this. I mean, so 3,000, I mean, that's how many citations were in How Not to Die.
yeah.
So, so basically what I did, I'm going to do it in spurts because it would be like a 12-hour webinar. It's just, so I just did a series, 9 videos on the Annals of Internal Medicine paper, came out last
Okay,
October.
correct.
Remember those
Yeah,
crazy
new
meat
corrects.
papers?
Okay.
And so I go through a number of things in there that was taken kind of out of that how to read a research paper kind of thing. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take advantage of any particular study comes out, and I'll just go into a little more detail as opposed to, I mean, it would take me a month to go through 3,000 articles.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know if it's worth it just for that. But yeah, it's the stuff I love. And I know there's lots of good nutrition nerds out there that would just eat it up. And maybe one of these days I'll have enough time. But unfortunately, I got to start my next book, How Not to Age, on longevity, which will be out December 2022. And it's not a lot of time. It's a lot of research to be done.
Yeah, and I just heard on your Q&A earlier you've got your book for like 2031 set up or lined up or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's assuming I'm going to be able to do a new book every 3 years. But look, if I'm not speaking anymore, so I mean, I take a year on the road
mhm.
speaking. If if people aren't gathering in crowds of more than 500 people or something, then maybe I'm not going to go on the road at all. We will see.
Mhm. No, 100% agree. But going back to my previous question about like newbies, trying to get into reading some of this research, what would you say are maybe a couple of the strongest papers for the benefits of a
Oh,
plant-based
okay.
diet?
So yeah, so let's start with a lifestyle heart trial.
Okay.
Ornish's landmark paper. It's the first. It was kind of the premiere. It's like randomized control trial. Let's see what happens. You could also look at his, prostate cancer, reversal of the progression of prostate cancer. Same kind of diet and lifestyle that reversed heart disease, also reversed progression of prostate cancer. Like, I mean, these are like monumental landmark things. Like, wait a second, we didn't even know that you could do this with diet. Um, and so it's basically whatever you're interested. If you're interested in diabetes, I can point you some really good diabetes studies. You're interested in multiple sclerosis or Crohn's disease or whatever. Within each food, the best broccoli study or the best cabbage study, or within a particular disease condition, there are certainly superstar studies out there. But yeah, so if anyone has any particular, I can point them in the right direction.
And there's a wonderful website called nutritionfacts.org as well that people can check out.
Whoa, really? Oh my God, that's the kind of website I wish I had when I was in med school.
Okay, so on to the next question actually here. This is one that I find every maybe 6 months something comes out about how plant-based diets harm your mental health, and actually vegetarian diets associated with poor mental health. And I believe this is one of the books you're going to be working on in the future as well on mental health. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's these are some kind of interesting studies. Most important thing is interventional studies, right? The problems with observational studies is there's confounding. Someone who's so, for example, vegetarianism can be used as a foil for an eating disorder. Oh, why aren't you eating? Well, I'm a vegetarian. But actually, they're not a vegetarian. They don't really care, but they're trying to, they're anorexic or something. And so you want to know, well, wait a second, what happens to mental health when you randomize people to a plant-based diet? And that was done at the University of Arizona. And within a period of 2 weeks, significant improvement in moods. in those randomized to a plant-based diet. The thing is to drop in arachidonic acid, this long-chain pro-inflammatory omega-6 compound found preformed, particularly in chicken and eggs, but throughout the animal kingdom. And they think that, so maybe dropping neuroinflammation, brain inflammation that may be impairing people's mood. I've got studies on, generalized anxiety disorder and kind of on down the list. But yeah, so when actually put to the test, we get an improvement, a significant improvement in mental well-being. And it's not just a plant-based diet, it's not just cutting out animal foods. If you randomize people to more fruits and vegetables, you get a significant boost. So yeah, so eat healthy.
Yeah, and there was actually a recent, I can't remember if it was a review or meta-analysis that looked at these observational trials and one randomized controlled trial, the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
But they rated the randomized controlled trial as the lowest quality. It didn't make any sense. They actually weighted it less than the observational trials, which showed that vegetarianism was associated with, worse health outcomes.
Huh, I wonder who funded that study.
It was, I believe, the beef checkoff. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Surprise.
Yeah. But they didn't provide a reason for doing that either. And I was trying to see what's the mentality here. Why are you doing that? But yeah, they just didn't.
I'll tell you the mentality. You just got money from the beef checkoff program. That's the.
All right. Actually, a couple last questions before we run out of time here. One of them is about do vegans or people who eat predominantly plant-based really need to supplement DHA? That's one that I think that. I mean, I do supplement as a safety measure, but I also
it's a good question, and it's an unanswered research question. But I think if you look at the data, I think we should consider it. 250 milligrams of a pollutant-free source, so an algae or yeast-based source, is what I do. And I think if you saw my video series on the topic, it would convince those to do it. In the future, we may have data pointing otherwise, but I think that's the current state of evidence.
Okay. And when someone, and I get this a lot, and it drives me nuts, is I'll have a patient come in saying that they're anemic. And then I look at their blood tests, their ferritins may be on the lower end, but their red blood cell count, their hemoglobin, fine, totally fine.
That's all we care about.
Why do their doctors tell them that they're anemic? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, the definition is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's fine. In fact, we want a low ferritin. We want low storage levels of iron because there's ferrotoxicity in diseases. It acts as a pro-oxidant. It's kind of a double-edged sword. You want to have just enough iron to have adequate red blood cell production, but no more. So having low ferritin, normal hemoglobin, that's where we all want to be. But look, maybe they have some lab tests you're not privy to or something, or anemia may just be kind of like some colloquial term, like I feel tired, so I have anemia or whatever. When in reality, it may be something else going on that we have to look into.
Yeah, and so having ferritin on the lower end, if hemoglobin's okay, would you say there's not another concern there with the low ferritin?
No, in fact, that's where we want to be.
Okay.
In fact, if you have a high ferritin, that's a bad thing in terms of cancer. And that's why you can rapidly drop cancer rates by doing, blood donations, essentially, because we think it's because you're lowering your iron stores. So yeah, it's actually a good thing to have low storage, low ferritin, but not low enough that it impairs your hemoglobin. And, so we don't want to be drinking, tea with our meals and other things that impair iron absorption. And we want to eat vitamin C rich foods with our meals, which improves iron absorption if we're on the low side. And so that's, tropical fruits and bell peppers and broccoli, that kind of thing.
And of course, focus on the lower oxalate greens, right? So not so much the spinach and Swiss chard.
Well, not in huge amounts. In the amounts of greens that people eat, it doesn't matter. But
okay.
You're going to eat the amount of greens that I want you to eat.
Yeah.
If you want to eat cups a day, well, then, we can diversify our greens.
Okay, well, I think that's about all the time we have for you before you get on to your next call. So thanks again for doing this.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we can get you out here next year if everything, we end up on the right track with everything going on in the world. But until then, I mean, I'll probably see you speak at the Plantrition Conference or some other things coming up soon.
Great. Can't wait.
Yeah. So thanks
Keep
again.
up the good work.
Bye.
All right.